Imagine this: a bustling courtroom filled with tension. A young black teen steps inside, dressed simply, clutching a notebook. The judge, an older man with a smirk, glances at the teen and chuckles. "What's this? Career day?" The courtroom erupts in laughter, but the teen doesn't flinch. He stands tall, his gaze unwavering. What happens next leaves everyone, especially the judge, utterly speechless. This isn't just a story about assumptions and appearances. It's about resilience, brilliance, and breaking barriers. Stay with us for a tale that will move you, inspire you, and remind you why we should never judge a book by its cover. The courtroom was unusually quiet for a Monday morning. Judge Harold Benson, known for his sharp tongue and impatience, sipped his coffee as he scanned the docket. He raised an eyebrow at the name listed for the next hearing: Jamal Thompson. When the bailiff called the case, a murmur spread through the room as a young black teen walked in. Dressed in a plain white button-up shirt and black slacks, Jamal carried a single leather notebook. His presence seemed out of place amidst the sea of polished attorneys and their expensive briefcases. Judge Benson leaned back in his chair and smirked. "Son, are you lost?" he quipped, his voice dripping with condescension. The courtroom erupted in light laughter, and the judge didn't bother to hide his amusement. Jamal, however, remained unfazed. He stood tall, his shoulders squared, and his gaze met the judge's directly. "No, Your Honor," Jamal replied, his voice steady. "I'm here to represent the defendant, Ms. Carla Reed." The room fell silent. Judge Benson's smirk faltered as he leaned forward, inspecting the teenager more closely. "Excuse me? You're her attorney?" "Yes, Your Honor," Jamal confirmed. "I'm fully prepared to proceed with her defense." The judge's laughter echoed through the courtroom. "This is a joke, right? Where's the real lawyer? Did someone put you up to this?" Jamal's jaw tightened, but he maintained his composure. "With all due respect, Your Honor, I'm more than qualified to be here. My credentials have been filed with the court." Judge Benson glanced toward the court clerk, who nodded hesitantly. Indeed, the necessary documents had been submitted and verified. The judge's expression shifted from amusement to disbelief. "Well, I suppose we'll see about that," the judge muttered. He turned his attention to the prosecution. "Mr. Klein, are you prepared to proceed?" "Of course, Your Honor," the opposing attorney replied, his tone laced with skepticism. "This should be interesting." Jamal approached the defense table, where Carla Reed, a middle-aged woman with tear-streaked cheeks, sat trembling. She looked at him with a mix of hope and uncertainty. "Don't worry, Ms. Reed," Jamal whispered as he took his seat. "We've got this." The hearing began, and Jamal wasted no time. His arguments were precise, his tone confident. He dissected the prosecution's evidence with a sharp intellect that left the courtroom stunned. Each point he raised was met with murmurs of surprise, and even the judge's demeanor began to shift. This was no ordinary teenager. By the end of the day, the once dismissive glances had turned into curious stares. Judge Benson called for a recess, his expression unreadable. As Jamal gathered his notes, Carla Reed grabbed his hand. "You're amazing," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you for believing in me." Jamal smiled softly. "We're just getting started." Outside the courtroom, reporters gathered, eager to learn more about the young man who had taken the legal world by storm. But Jamal paid them no mind. He had a mission, and nothing, not even the skepticism of a seasoned judge, was going to stand in his way. The buzz around the courtroom had not subsided by the time the session resumed the following day. News of the teen attorney had spread, drawing in a crowd of onlookers curious to witness what many assumed was a spectacle. Jamal Thompson arrived early. his leather notebook tucked under his arm, and his expression calm despite the palpable tension in the room. As the proceedings began, the prosecution wasted no time ramping up their efforts. Mr. Klein, a seasoned attorney with decades of experience, was determined to expose Jamal's supposed incompetence. He began with a barrage of objections, interrupting Jamal's statements at every turn. "Objection, Your Honor. Counsel is leading the witness," Klein interjected, as Jamal questioned Carla Reed about the events leading to her arrest. Judge Benson, who had been observing Jamal with a mixture of curiosity and skepticism, nodded. "Sustained. Watch your phrasing, Mr. Thompson." Jamal adjusted his approach, carefully rephrasing his questions, but the interruptions continued, each one chipping away at the rhythm he was trying to establish. The audience murmured, sensing the tension between the two attorneys. When it was Klein's turn to present evidence, he did so with an air of superiority. He paraded expert witnesses and presented charts and graphs, each piece meticulously designed to paint Carla Reed as guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. Jamal sat quietly, taking notes. But inside, he was strategizing. He knew he had to find a way to dismantle the narrative Klein was constructing, and he had to do it without losing the judge's confidence. At recess, Carla's anxiety was palpable. "Jamal, he's making me look like a monster. What if the jury believes him?" Jamal placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "The truth is on our side," he said firmly. "I just need you to trust me." Back in the courtroom, Jamal made his move. He began cross-examining Klein's star witness, a forensic expert whose testimony had been pivotal to the prosecution's case. With calm precision, Jamal questioned the expert's methods, highlighting inconsistencies in the data. "Mr. Lewis, you stated that the fingerprints on the evidence were a match to my client's. Is that correct?" Jamal asked. "Yes," the expert replied confidently. Jamal nodded. "And how many sets of prints were found at the scene?" "2 sets," Mr. Lewis admitted. "But you only tested one of those sets, correct?" The expert hesitated, glancing at Klein before answering. "Yes, that's correct." "So it's possible that the other set belongs to the actual perpetrator?" Jamal pressed. "I suppose that's possible," the expert conceded. The room buzzed with whispers. Judge Benson rapped his gavel to restore order, but even he looked intrigued. Jamal's line of questioning had introduced doubt, a crack in the prosecution's seemingly airtight case. By the end of the day, Jamal had managed to shift the momentum. Carla's spirits were visibly lifted as they left the courtroom. "You were incredible today," she said, her voice filled with hope. Jamal smiled. "We're not done yet, Miss Reed. Tomorrow we'll prove your innocence." As they walked past the growing crowd of reporters, Jamal remained focused. The road ahead was still fraught with challenges, but he was determined to see it through. The next morning, the courtroom was even more crowded than before. News outlets had picked up the story of the young attorney challenging a seasoned prosecutor, and the case had become a local sensation. Jamal Thompson arrived early again, his expression calm but focused. He knew the day ahead would test him in new ways. As the proceedings resumed, Mr. Klein opened with an aggressive tactic. He presented a surprise witness, a neighbor who claimed to have seen Carla Reed near the crime scene on the night in question. The witness, an older man with a stern demeanor, recounted his version of events with conviction. "I saw her walking down the street around 9 p.m., right near where it all happened," the man said. "She looked nervous, like she was up to something." The jury's eyes shifted toward Carla, who visibly shrank in her seat. Jamal, however, remained composed. He approached the witness stand with his notebook in hand, his mind racing to find the cracks in the testimony. "Mr. Hargrove," Jamal began, his tone respectful but firm, You said you saw my client at 9 p.m., is that correct? Yes, that's right, the man replied. Jamal nodded. And where were you at the time? I was on my porch having a smoke, Hargrove said confidently. Interesting, Jamal said, flipping through his notes. Can you tell the court how well lit the street is from your porch? Hargrove hesitated. Well, it's not very bright, but I've got good eyesight. Jamal raised an eyebrow. Good eyesight, you say? Mr. Hargrove, would you mind telling the court the color of the jacket my client was allegedly wearing? The man's confidence faltered. I think it was dark, maybe black. Jamal smiled faintly. My client doesn't own a black jacket, Mr. Hargrove. In fact, she was wearing a bright yellow coat that evening, which several witnesses can corroborate. Are you sure it was my client you saw? The courtroom buzzed with whispers as the jury exchanged glances. Judge Benson banged his gavel. Order in the court, he barked. Hargrove shifted uncomfortably in his seat. I might have been mistaken, he admitted quietly. Thank you, Mr. Hargrove, that will be all, Jamal said, returning to his seat. As the day progressed, Jamal continued to dismantle the prosecution's case piece by piece. He cross-examined witnesses, highlighted inconsistencies in their statements, and presented evidence that cast doubt on the timeline of events. Each small victory bolstered Carla's confidence and shifted the jury's perception. During a break, Carla turned to Jamal with tears in her eyes. How do you stay so calm? She asked. I feel like I'm falling apart. Jamal smiled gently. It's not about being calm, he said. It's about focusing on the truth. As long as we stick to that, we'll be okay. By the end of the day, the tide seemed to be turning in their favor. Jamal's methodical approach had begun to unravel the prosecution's narrative, and even Judge Benson appeared to regard him with a newfound respect. As Jamal packed up his things, a reporter approached him outside the courthouse. Mr. Thompson, do you think you have a chance of winning this case? She asked, her microphone aimed at him. Jamal paused, his gaze steady. It's not about winning, he said. It's about justice, and justice always has a chance. The reporter's expression softened, and she lowered her microphone. As Jamal walked away, the crowd parted for him, their whispers filled with a mix of awe and admiration. He knew the road ahead was still long, but for the first time, he felt the weight of possibility. The courtroom buzzed with anticipation as the trial reached its midpoint. Jamal had managed to create doubt in the prosecution's case, but he knew that the hardest battles were yet to come. He had spent the previous night poring over every detail of the case file, searching for the missing piece that could tip the scales definitively in Carla's favor. The morning began with an unexpected twist. Mr. Klein announced that he had secured video footage allegedly placing Carla at the scene of the crime. The jury's interest piqued, and even Jamal felt his stomach tighten. He hadn't been informed of this evidence, and its sudden introduction threatened to derail his carefully constructed defense. Your Honor, Jamal said, standing to address the bench, this evidence was not disclosed during discovery. I request a recess to review it. Judge Benson frowned but nodded. Granted. Court will adjourn for 30 minutes. In the quiet of the conference room, Jamal and Carla watched the grainy footage. It showed a figure in a dark hoodie walking near the crime scene. The timestamp aligned with the time of the incident, and the prosecution argued that the figure's build matched Carla's. That's not me, Carla said, her voice trembling. I wasn't even near that place. Jamal studied the footage carefully. Something about it felt off, but he couldn't quite put his finger on it. When court reconvened, Klein played the video for the jury, emphasizing its implications. Ladies and gentlemen, he said, This is irrefutable proof that the defendant was at the scene of the crime. There's no other explanation. Jamal stood to cross-examine the technician who had authenticated the footage. "Mr. Patel," he began, "when and where was this footage obtained?" "It was retrieved from a traffic camera near the scene," Patel replied. "And can you confirm the integrity of the footage? Is it possible that it has been altered?" Jamal asked. Patel hesitated. "Theoretically, it could be altered, but there's no evidence of tampering here." Jamal nodded thoughtfully. "No evidence, but also no guarantees. Is that correct?" "That's correct," Patel admitted. Jamal's heart raced as he moved to his next point. "Your Honor, I request access to the original source of this footage for independent analysis. Until then, I argue that its validity remains questionable." Judge Benson sighed, clearly weighing his options. "The defense's request is granted. We will adjourn for the day." Outside the courtroom, Jamal's frustration was evident. The sudden appearance of this evidence felt like a calculated move to destabilize his defense. Yet, he refused to let it break his resolve. That evening, Jamal visited Carla's neighborhood, hoping to uncover anything that could help. He spoke to neighbors, reviewed local security cameras, and finally stumbled upon a lead. A shopkeeper mentioned seeing someone in a similar hoodie that night, but it wasn't Carla. It was a man known for petty crimes in the area. The next day in court, Jamal presented his findings. "Your Honor," he said, "this new information suggests that the person in the footage may not be my client, but someone else entirely. I'd like to call a new witness to testify." Klein objected, arguing that the defense was grasping at straws, but Judge Benson allowed it. The shopkeeper's testimony cast further doubt on the prosecution's case, and Jamal's persistence began to shift the narrative. By the end of the day, Jamal had managed to introduce a critical element of reasonable doubt. Yet, as he left the courthouse, he couldn't shake the feeling that the prosecution still had more tricks up their sleeve. The battle was far from over. As the trial continued, the atmosphere in the courtroom became more intense with each passing day. Jamal could feel the weight of the case pressing down on him, but he refused to let it show. His meticulous preparation and determination had already shifted the narrative, but he knew the prosecution wasn't finished yet. On the morning of the 5th day, Mr. Klein delivered another surprise. "Your Honor," he said, rising with a confident smirk, "I have a key witness who can directly link the defendant to the crime." The room fell silent as the judge allowed the new witness to be called. A man in his mid-30s with a nervous demeanor took the stand. His name was Andre Collins, and he claimed to have seen Carla fleeing the scene on the night of the incident. Jamal's mind raced. This testimony could undo all the progress he had made. As Klein questioned Collins, the story seemed airtight. Collins described Carla's alleged actions in detail, painting a picture of guilt that seemed hard to refute. When it was Jamal's turn to cross-examine, he approached the witness stand with calculated calm. "Mr. Collins," he began, "you've given a very detailed account of what you claim to have seen. May I ask where you were at the time of the incident?" Collins hesitated. "I was walking home from work." "And what is your usual route home?" Jamal pressed. Collins described a path that didn't align with the crime scene's location. Jamal seized the opportunity. "So, Mr. Collins, you're telling this court that you deviated from your usual route that night. Can you explain why?" Collins shifted uncomfortably. I took a shortcut," he stammered. Jamal leaned in slightly, locking eyes with the witness. "Isn't it true, Mr. Collins, that you've been convicted of perjury in the past?" The courtroom gasped. Collins's face went pale. I made mistakes," he admitted. "Mistakes like lying under oath?" Jamal pressed. his voice steady but firm. Before Collins could respond, Klein objected, but the damage had been done. The jury now viewed the testimony with skepticism. After the day's session, Jamal returned to his makeshift office determined to dig deeper. He combed through public records and discovered a connection between Collins and the victim's family. The next morning, he presented his findings in court. "Your Honor," Jamal began, "I have evidence suggesting that Mr. Collins has a personal motive to testify against my client. He has long-standing ties to the victim's family and owes them a substantial debt. This calls his credibility into question." The revelation caused an uproar. Klein scrambled to counter the claim, but the damage was irreversible. The jury's trust in the prosecution's case was eroding. Despite the victory, Jamal knew the trial wasn't over. That evening, as he reviewed the case file yet again, he noticed something he had overlooked. The original police report mentioned a key piece of evidence that had mysteriously disappeared: a cell phone belonging to the victim. The next day, Jamal addressed the court. "Your Honor, I believe this trial cannot proceed fairly without accounting for all evidence. I request that the prosecution produce the missing cell phone or explain its absence." Judge Benson frowned. "Mr. Klein, do you have an explanation?" Klein hesitated, clearly caught off guard. "The phone was lost during the initial investigation, Your Honor." "Lost?" Jamal repeated. "Or deliberately concealed? The phone could contain information critical to this case. I request a thorough investigation." The judge agreed, ordering a review of the evidence handling process. The trial was adjourned for the day, leaving the courtroom buzzing with speculation. As Jamal left the courthouse, he felt a mix of triumph and unease. He had managed to discredit a key witness and expose potential misconduct, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something even bigger was at play. The truth was close, but so was the danger of failure. The courtroom was electric as the trial entered its most critical phase. The investigation into the missing cell phone had sent shockwaves through the proceedings, casting further doubt on the prosecution's case. But Jamal knew that the battle wasn't over. Klein was a seasoned prosecutor, and Jamal could sense he had something up his sleeve. As the day began, Klein wasted no time. "Your Honor," he said, his voice firm, "the defense's speculation about the missing cell phone is just that, speculation. Let's refocus on the evidence we do have, which clearly implicates the defendant." Jamal rose to his feet. "Your Honor, if the prosecution is so confident in their evidence, why are they so eager to dismiss the importance of the missing phone?" "It's not speculation. It's a crucial piece of this case." Judge Benson nodded. "Enough, gentlemen. Let's proceed with the witnesses." The first witness of the day was the lead detective on the case, Detective Harris. Jamal had been waiting for this moment. As Harris took the stand, Jamal prepared his questions, knowing that this testimony could make or break the case. "Detective Harris," Jamal began, "you oversaw the investigation into this case, correct?" "That's correct," Harris replied, "and you filed the original report that mentioned the victim's cell phone. Can you explain what happened to it?" Harris hesitated. "It went missing during the investigation. These things happen sometimes." Jamal's eyes narrowed. "These things happen? Detective, would you agree that mishandling evidence undermines the integrity of an investigation?" "Yes, but—" Jamal cut him off. "Detective, are you aware that withholding or mishandling evidence is a serious violation?" The tension in the courtroom was palpable. Harris shifted in his seat. "I'm aware, yes." Jamal pressed on. "Isn't it true that the missing cell phone could contain information that exonerates my client?" Klein objected, but the judge allowed the question. Harris looked flustered. "It's possible," he admitted reluctantly. Jamal turned to the jury. "Possible. Ladies and gentlemen, doesn't my client deserve certainty? Doesn't she deserve a fair trial? The judge called for a brief recess, giving everyone a chance to regroup. During the break, Jamal reviewed his notes, searching for anything he might have missed. Then it hit him, the victim's cell phone records. Even if the physical phone was gone, the records could still exist. Back in the courtroom, Jamal made his move. Your Honor, I request a subpoena for the victim's cell phone records. This information could be pivotal to uncovering the truth. Klein objected vehemently, but Judge Benson granted the request. The records were ordered, and court was adjourned for the day to allow time for their retrieval. That evening, Jamal worked late into the night, preparing for what he knew would be a pivotal moment. When the records arrived the next morning, they revealed something shocking. A series of text messages sent from the victim's phone just minutes before the crime. The messages contradicted the timeline presented by the prosecution and suggested the involvement of a third party. In court, Jamal presented the findings. Your Honor, these records prove that my client couldn't have been at the scene of the crime at the time the prosecution claims. The messages indicate the presence of someone else who hasn't been investigated. The courtroom erupted. Klein tried to downplay the evidence, but the judge demanded an explanation. The trial was thrown into chaos as new questions emerged about the integrity of the investigation and the possibility of another suspect. Jamal's client, Carla, looked at him with tears in her eyes. For the first time, there was real hope. The jury's expressions had shifted, and Jamal knew they were beginning to see the truth. But the fight wasn't over. Jamal still had to deliver his closing argument, a moment that would require every ounce of his skill and passion. As he prepared for the final day of the trial, he reminded himself of why he had taken this case. It wasn't just about proving Carla's innocence. It was about standing up for justice and showing the world that even a young lawyer could make a difference. The courtroom was packed for the final day of the trial. News of the missing cell phone and the explosive text messages had drawn attention far beyond the small community. Reporters lined the back of the room, their cameras poised to capture every moment. Jamal, standing tall and composed, knew this was his moment to seal the case. Judge Benson called the court to order, and Jamal rose to deliver his closing argument. He began with a pause, allowing the weight of the moment to settle over the room. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, he said, his voice steady but passionate, this case has been a battle for truth, and the truth is that Carla Davis is innocent. But this isn't just about her. It's about ensuring that our justice system upholds its promise to every individual, to seek the truth without bias or shortcuts. Jamal paced the floor, his words deliberate. The prosecution has painted a picture of Carla based on incomplete evidence and assumptions. But evidence isn't just what's presented, it's also what's missing. The cell phone, the messages, the timeline, all point to one undeniable conclusion. Carla didn't commit this crime. He turned to the jury, meeting their eyes one by one. Imagine for a moment that this was your daughter, your sister, or your friend sitting in Carla's place. Would you accept a conviction based on half-truths and negligence, or would you demand justice? The courtroom was silent. Even Klein seemed subdued, his earlier confidence replaced with a stoic expression. Jamal continued, his voice rising with conviction. This isn't just about Carla. It's about all of us. It's about standing up against a system that sometimes falters and demanding better. Because justice isn't just a word, it's a responsibility. Jamal returned to his table, his argument complete. Carla reached out and squeezed his hand, her eyes filled with gratitude. The jury was dismissed to deliberate, and the courtroom emptied, leaving behind an air of anticipation. Hours passed. The waiting was agonizing. Carla's family and friends gathered around her, offering quiet words of encouragement. Jamal sat alone, his mind racing through every detail of the trial. Had he done enough? Finally, the jury returned. The courtroom filled once more as everyone took their seats. Judge Benson addressed the foreperson. "Have you reached a verdict?" "We have, Your Honor," the foreperson replied, standing. "We find the defendant, Carla Davis, not guilty." The words echoed through the room. Carla gasped, her hands flying to her face as tears streamed down her cheeks. Her family erupted in cheers, and even some spectators applauded. Jamal felt a wave of relief and pride wash over him. He had done it. As Carla hugged her family, she turned to Jamal. "I don't know how to thank you," she said, her voice choked with emotion. "You believed in me when no one else did." Jamal smiled. "You don't need to thank me. Just live your life and prove to the world that justice matters." The story didn't end there. The revelations during the trial prompted an investigation into the handling of evidence, leading to reforms within the local police department. Jamal's performance in court became the talk of the legal community, earning him respect and new opportunities. But for Jamal, the case was about more than career advancement. It was a reminder of why he had pursued law in the first place: to make a difference. As he walked out of the courthouse that day, reporters swarmed him with questions. Jamal paused, looked into the cameras, and said, "This victory isn't mine. It belongs to Carla and to everyone who believes in fighting for what's right. Justice isn't always easy, but it's always worth it."